The message arrived at 7:42 on a Thursday evening. 12 people were on the group thread, but the text belonged to my older sister, Savannah. It read in all caps, "You make more than all of us combined. Just pay for it." She was talking about a bachelorette trip to Bali, 10 days in a private cliffside villa in Seminyak, chartered yacht excursions and VIP tables at beach clubs. The estimated cost hovered near $50,000. She expected me to absorb the expense as a maid of honor gift without asking a single question. I sat at the kitchen island of my Dallas condo and read the text until the screen went dark. Then I set the phone face down on the marble counter. My name is Larissa Jade. I am 24 years old and I read data for a living. From a laptop in my college dorm room, I built a digital marketing analytics firm that now occupies a corner office in Uptown. Numbers are clean. They do not lie. They do not care about appearances. Families, however, operate on different metrics. In the enclaves of Texas high society, reputation is the only currency that matters. A wedding is not a celebration. It is a strategic deployment of wealth, requiring silver basins and five-course dinners orchestrated like diplomatic summits. Savannah is 28. She spent her childhood collecting pageant crowns, while I spent mine learning to code. Now she is preparing to marry Trent, the son of a legacy commercial real estate developer. She is the golden child bred for the spotlight. I am the contingency plan bred to fund it. Welcome to QT Told Stories, the channel where quiet women finally say enough and family secrets meet daylight. If you have ever been the one holding your family up, tell me your age in the comments below and be sure to subscribe. My phone buzzed against the marble. Another bridesmaid sent a wide-eyed emoji. My mother, Caroline, added a heart to Savannah's demand. They were waiting for me to yield the way I always yielded when the pressure mounted and the family image was at stake. But they did not know what I was looking at. While Savannah was picking out matching silk pajamas for a flight to Indonesia, I was reconciling my quarterly tax documents. My laptop sat open next to my silent phone. On the screen was a statement from an old emergency joint account I shared with my parents. I kept it funded to handle sudden property taxes or unexpected hospital bills. The balance was supposed to be $40,000. I dragged my cursor over the most recent line item. The account held exactly 84 cents. The money had not vanished into thin air. It had been routed 3 weeks prior to an LLC I did not recognize. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of a system failure. Savannah wanted me to pay for Bali, believing I was blind to the ground giving way beneath her feet. I reached for my phone, but I did not type an apology or a defense. Instead, I opened the county clerk portal, preparing to pull a single public record that would end my role as their silent bank. To understand how a family safety net quietly evaporates into pocket change, you have to understand the Texas high society tax. It is an unspoken ledger, a silent and relentless drain on anyone capable of producing actual wealth. In my world, money is rarely discussed aloud, yet it dictates every interaction, every invitation, and every calculated smile. The culture here is built on a proud, extravagant social scene where legacy names hold court and new money pays the entry fee. My mother, Caroline, treats Southern hospitality as a competitive sport. She is a woman who coordinates charity galas and seasonal luncheons with the focus of a battlefield commander. Her hair is always perfectly highlighted, her pastel sheath dress is immaculate, and her social calendar ruthlessly curated. Caroline views her family's reputation as her life work. But maintaining that pristine facade requires capital, and for the last 4 years that capital has come from my business. I became the silent infrastructure holding up her socialite ambitions. Whenever a silent auction needed a winning bid to save face, or a country club membership required an unscheduled assessment fee, my credit cards were always expected to bridge the gap. The expectation was never a request. It was framed as a duty. 6 months ago, that duty reached a new threshold. Caroline invited me to lunch at our country club. She secured a table on the terrace overlooking the manicured 18th green and ordered sparkling water with a twist of lime before I even sat down. She did not ask how my marketing firm was doing. She did not ask about my life. Instead, she slid a glossy, heavy stock brochure across the linen tablecloth. It was a promotional packet for a historic hill country estate, the most exclusive wedding venue outside of Austin. The grounds featured centuries-old oak trees, a limestone chapel, and a reception hall wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. Savannah had set her heart on it for her autumn wedding. Caroline tapped her manicured fingernail against the brochure. She explained that transparents were inviting their entire network of commercial real estate developers and local politicians. The bride's family was traditionally responsible for the venue, and Caroline insisted we could not look like we were cutting corners. The deposit to secure the date was $80,000. I sat there, listening to the ice clink in my glass, doing the mental math. I could afford it, but it was an extraordinary amount of liquid cash to drop on a single afternoon event. I hesitated. Caroline leaned forward, her voice dropping into that familiar, honeyed register she used whenever she needed compliance. She told me this was not just a party. She called it an investment in the family name. She framed it as a necessary maneuver to ensure Savannah married into the right echelon of society. She looked at me with an expression of maternal pride that I rarely saw directed my way, a look usually reserved entirely for Savannah when she walked across a pageant stage. If I provided the funds I was saving the day, I was essential. For most of my life, I equated financial utility with being loved. When you grow up in the shadow of a golden child, a daughter bred for the spotlight, while you sit in the audience, you find other ways to earn your place at the table. Savannah was the beauty. I was the bank. I wanted that maternal smile. I wanted to feel like I belonged in the family narrative. I reached into my bag, pulled out my corporate American Express card, and placed it on the white linen. Caroline's smile widened, bright and triumphant. She took the card, kissed the air near my cheek, and told me I was a good sister. I went back to my office that afternoon feeling a hollow sort of validation. I had purchased my approval and the transaction was complete. Or so I thought. The reality of being the family checkbook is that the withdrawals rarely stop at the agreed boundary. 3 weeks ago, while preparing for my corporate and personal quarterly tax filings, I sat at my desk to audit my accounts. I am meticulous with my data. I categorize every expense, monitor every asset, and track every liability. Among my portfolio was an old joint checking account I had opened years ago with my parents. I left it funded with $40,000 as a strict safety net. It was designed for emergencies, a blown air conditioning unit in the dead of a Dallas summer, a sudden medical deductible, or a spike in property taxes. I kept the balance high enough to cover disasters so I would never have to receive a panicked phone call in the middle of a workday. I opened the digital statement for the joint account just to verify the interest yield. That was when I noticed the discrepancy. The ledger showed a series of unusual transfers. $30,000 had been systematically drained over the course of 2 months. The money had not gone toward a hospital bill or a roof repair. The outgoing wire transfers were coded to a boutique floral design studio based in Austin. I stared at the screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating the quiet realization settling in my chest. Savannah and Caroline had secretly gained access to the emergency fund. They bypassed me entirely. I knew exactly what the money was for. A few weeks prior, Savannah had complained at a family dinner that the standard floral package at the Hill Country estate was too sparse. She wanted imported white orchids, suspended floral chandeliers over the dance floor, and a custom archway for the ceremony. I had advised her to stick to her budget. She did not stick to her budget. She simply took my money to upgrade the florist. The theft of the $30,000 was not just a financial blow. It was a clear, unambiguous statement about how they viewed me. I was not a daughter or a sister to them. I was an unmonitored resource. They believed my wealth was a communal asset available for their vanity, requiring neither permission nor gratitude. They felt entitled to my labor. They rated a safety net designed to protect our family from ruin, all so Savannah could have imported orchids hanging above her head while she danced. I did not call my mother. I did not text my sister to demand an explanation. I did not scream or throw my coffee cup against the wall. The business world had taught me a fundamental rule regarding betrayal. When you discover a leak in your operation, you do not immediately alert the people holding the bucket. You watch. You audit the rest of the system, you gather your data, and you prepare a structural response. I sat in my quiet office listening to the hum of the city traffic below, and I began a forensic sweep of every single financial tie I shared with my family. I traced routing numbers, I pulled property records, I checked credit lines. I wanted to know exactly how deep the rot went before I severed the branch. That $30,000 floral upgrade was the minor fracture that warned of a structural collapse. It set the stage for the text message I would receive weeks later. They thought they could quietly drain my emergency fund and then boldly demand I pay for a luxury vacation to Bali. They assumed my silence meant ignorance. They assumed my compliance was permanent. They had no idea that I was already building the firewall. 2 days after I discovered the drained emergency fund, Savannah summoned the bridal party. She did not call it a meeting. She called it a vision brunch. The chosen venue was a glass-walled bistro in Highland Park, a neighborhood where the valets park imported sports cars and a basic salad costs $40. It was the preferred staging ground for Dallas women who wanted to be seen making plans. 6 of us sat around a long, reclaimed wood table. Savannah commanded the head seat, radiant in a white linen sundress. Caroline sat immediately to her right, acting as the unofficial co-chair of the wedding committee. I took a chair near the end, sipping sparkling water and waiting for the agenda. Savannah reached into a canvas tote bag and produced a stack of custom-printed folders. They were tied with silk ribbons that matched her wedding colors. She passed them down the table with the practiced grace of a pageant queen handing out trophies. I untied the ribbon on my folder and opened it. Inside was a 10-day itinerary printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock. The header read Savannah's last sail before the veil. I read down the list of scheduled events. It was not a vacation. It was a logistical marathon of luxury. Day 1 featured first-class flights to Denpasar, followed by a transfer to a private cliffside villa in Seminyak. Day 3 detailed a chartered catamaran excursion to the Nusa Islands, featuring a private chef. Day 5 mandated VIP table service at an exclusive beach club. Day 7 included full-day spa buyouts. The girls around the table murmured in impressed tones, flipping through the glossy pages. They were all daughters of privilege, women who grew up taking ski trips to Aspen and summering in Cabo. But even for this demographic, the itinerary was staggering. A 10-day trip to Indonesia with private aviation and exclusive real estate rentals was a significant financial commitment. A bridesmaid named Taylor, a corporate attorney who actually understood the value of $1, gently cleared her throat. She traced her finger over the gold foil lettering. "Savannah, this looks incredible, truly a dream trip. But what are we looking at for the out-of-pocket cost per person? I just need to figure out my spending limits for the quarter." The table went quiet. It was the necessary, uncomfortable question that always hangs over these high society functions. Savannah did not miss a beat. She waved a manicured hand, her engagement ring catching the morning sunlight pouring through the bistro windows. "Oh, do not worry about the heavy lifting, girls. Larissa is covering the flights and the villa rental. It is her maid of honor gift to me. Right, sis?" Every face at the table turned in my direction. Before I could even process the audacity of the claim, Caroline chimed in. My mother stirred her iced tea, the ice clinking softly against the glass. "Larissa has more money than she knows what to do with at 24, she said, her tone dripping with a practiced maternal sweetness. "It is only fair she shares her blessings with her sister. Family takes care of family, and we want Savannah to have the perfect send-off." I looked at my mother, then at my sister. The architecture of their ambush was flawless. They had orchestrated this moment in public, surrounded by peers, weaponizing the rules of Southern etiquette against me. They knew that in this specific zip code, causing a scene over money at a Sunday brunch was a cardinal sin. If I refused, I became the selfish, ungrateful younger sister, hoarding her wealth while ruining the bride's dream. If I agreed, I surrendered $50,000 to maintain an illusion. In the past, the pressure of those expectant stares would have suffocated me. I would have nodded, smiled, and quietly transferred the funds to avoid the social friction. That was the role I was assigned. I was the silent engine powering their social ascent. But that was before I saw the balance of the emergency account. That was before I knew they were already stealing from me. I did not drop my fork. I did not gasp. I did not raise my voice or launch into a defensive monologue about financial boundaries. The business world had taught me that whoever loses their temper first loses the negotiation. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The carbonation burned slightly on the way down. I set the glass back on the linen coaster, perfectly centered. "That is quite an itinerary," I said, my voice steady and flat. I looked directly into Savannah's eyes, refusing to break contact. "I will need to check my budget. I will let you know." Savannah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a microscopic crack in her facade, visible only to someone who had spent 2 decades watching her perform. Caroline's posture stiffened. The other bridesmaids exchanged nervous, fleeting glances, sensing the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. The script had called for my immediate submission, and I had missed my cue. I opened my purse and pulled out 2 $50 bills. I placed them neatly on the table next to my untouched Cobb salad. "Enjoy the rest of brunch, ladies," I said. "I have a project that requires my attention." I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the bistro. I did not look back. I did not wait for the valet to fetch my car. I walked 3 blocks to where I had parked on a side street, the Texas heat pressing down on my shoulders. By the time I started the engine, my phone was already lighting up with a barrage of texts from Savannah, demanding to know why I had embarrassed her in front of her friends. I muted the thread and merged onto the highway. I drove straight to my office in Uptown. The building was empty on a Sunday, the quiet corridors offering a sanctuary of silence. I walked into my suite, locked the glass door behind me, and turned on the overhead lights. The emotional theater of the brunch was over. It was time to deal with the data. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My firm specializes in digital analytics, which means I spend my days tracing the invisible threads of consumer behavior, ad spend, and market trends. Finding hidden information is not just my job, it is my singular talent. If a piece of data exists on a server, I know how to extract it, organize it, and read the story it tells. I started with the $30,000 missing from the joint emergency account. The wire transfer receipt had included a routing number and a partial name for the receiving entity. It was not a floral boutique. It was a limited liability company. I logged into the Texas Secretary of State Business Search Portal. I paid the nominal search fee and entered the LLC information. The results loaded in less than 2 seconds. The company was registered as a real estate holding firm. The registered agent was Trent Savannah's fiancé. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the screen. My sister and my mother had drained my emergency fund, the money meant to keep a roof over our heads in a crisis, and funneled it directly into a shell company controlled by Trent. The wedding was a smokescreen. The floral upgrade was a lie. They were moving cash into his pockets. But the puzzle was incomplete. $30,000 was a significant sum, but it was not enough to fund the lifestyle Savannah and Trent were projecting. They were hosting engagement parties with top-shelf liquor, booking historic venues, and planning international bachelorette excursions. Where was the rest of the capital coming from? I pivoted my search. I left the business registry and opened the county property tax records. I typed in the address of our family home, a sprawling legacy ranch inherited by my father, Richard. The ranch had been in our family for 3 generations. It was the anchor of our identity, the physical proof of our Texas heritage. It had been fully paid off since I was in high school. The property record populated on my screen. I scanned down to the lien history. My breath caught in my throat. There, recorded just 4 months ago, was a secondary deed of trust, a new mortgage. My parents had leveraged the ranch, taking out a staggering loan against the equity of our ancestral home. I downloaded the PDF and read the terms. The interest rate was predatory. The monthly payments were astronomical. My father, a passive man who had spent his life avoiding conflict and letting Caroline manage the finances, had signed the paperwork. They had mortgaged their future, their retirement, and their home to fund a wedding spectacle they could not afford. I sat in the sterile, air-conditioned quiet of my office and let the reality wash over me. My family was not wealthy. They were drowning. They were entirely underwater, suffocating under a mountain of debt designed to maintain a country club facade. And I was their only life raft. They expected me to pay for Bali because they literally had 0 cash left. Every demand, every guilt trip, every manipulation was born from the desperate, terrifying realization that they had run out of other people's money. They were banking on my assumed compliance to keep the illusion alive. I looked at the screen, staring at the digital footprint of their deception. The minor fracture I had noticed days ago was actually a gaping fault line. The ground had already collapsed. I closed the property record and reached for my phone, ready to trace the final thread of Trent's holding company, knowing the next discovery would be the one that burned the entire bridge to the ground. I sat in the sterile chill of my office and stared at the digital footprint of a family collapsing under its own weight. The county clerk portal remained open on my monitor. The secondary deed of trust on the family ranch felt heavy even as a collection of pixels. I zoomed in on the signature line. There, beneath my mother's elegant looping cursive, was my father's signature. Richard Jade is a man composed entirely of concessions. He spent my childhood retreating to his study, yielding every domestic and financial decision to Caroline rather than face an uncomfortable conversation. I had always viewed his passivity as a harmless quirk, a survival tactic for marriage to a local socialite. Seeing his signature on a document that leveraged 3 generations of Texas heritage changed that perspective. The ranch was the anchor of our identity. My grandfather built the main house with cash. My father swore to never put a bank's name on the deed, yet he surrendered our foundation just to avoid an argument about floral arrangements and ice sculptures. The mortgage was only half of the equation. I needed to understand where the stolen $30,000 had landed. I opened a new tab and accessed the Dallas County Commercial Real Estate Database. I cross-referenced the routing number from the drained emergency account with the limited liability company registered to Savannah's fiancé. Trent liked to project the image of a titan in the making. He attended country club mixers in bespoke suits, swirling expensive bourbon while talking loudly about market yields and property acquisitions. The data on my screen told a different story. The LLC had exactly one asset. 3 weeks ago, on the exact day my safety net was emptied, Trent's holding company closed on a luxury condominium in a high-rise downtown. The public sales record listed a cash down payment of exactly $30,000. I pulled the warranty deed. I read the legal phrasing twice to ensure I was interpreting the boilerplate text correctly. Savannah's name appeared nowhere on the document. She was not listed as a co-signer, a tenant in common, or a member of the LLC. She had taken money from a fund I built to protect our parents from medical emergencies, and she handed it to a man who used it to purchase real estate exclusively in his own name. She funded his private equity while under the delusion that they were building a life together. I opened a blank spreadsheet. When emotions threatened to cloud my judgment, I built a ledger. I entered the $80,000 venue deposit currently sitting on my corporate credit card. I added the $30,000 theft. Then I factored in the new mortgage on the ranch. The loan amount was $150,000. I cross-referenced the standard costs of a high-society hill country wedding. Catering for 300 guests, a 10-piece brass band, custom silk bridesmaid gowns, the photography packages, the math aligned with terrifying precision. My parents liquidated the equity of their only unencumbered asset to finance a single evening of pageantry. They were operating on a deficit so deep it bordered on financial ruin. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a bleak picture of their strategy. The second mortgage covered the immediate wedding vendors. The stolen emergency funds secured Trent a bachelor pad disguised as a marital investment, and I was the designated shock absorber. They expected me to pay for a $50,000 excursion to Bali because their own checking accounts were hollowed out. They had zero cash left. The realization settled into my chest, cooling the initial sting of betrayal into something hard and unyielding. For years, I interpreted Caroline's requests for my credit card as a twisted form of maternal inclusion. I thought my ability to fund her galas earned me a seat at the table. I thought Savannah's willingness to let me pay for her bridal expenses meant she viewed me as a supportive sister. I remembered the countless times Savannah received praise for her beauty and grace, while I received polite nods, followed by an invoice for the catering. I built a lucrative company from nothing, yet in their eyes my success was merely a communal resource. I was never a daughter to Caroline. I was never a sister to Savannah. I was a contingency plan. They viewed my marketing firm not as a point of pride, but as an endless, unmonitored aquifer they could tap whenever their ambitions exceeded their reality. They did not respect the late nights I spent building my client list. They did not value the discipline it took to maintain a thriving business at 24. They only valued the liquidity I provided. I was an automated teller machine they kept in the corner of the room, useful only when the social bills came due. I took a deep breath, the cool air of the office filling my lungs. The adrenaline that usually accompanies a family fight was absent. Instead, my pulse was steady. My hands did not shake as I navigated back to the county clerk's portal. I needed evidence that could not be debated, manipulated, or spun into a narrative of misunderstanding. I downloaded the secondary deed of trust, ensuring the file captured the signatures of both Caroline and Richard. I saved the document to a secure folder on my desktop. Next, I moved to the commercial real estate database. I captured a high-resolution image of the warranty deed for the luxury condominium, highlighting the LLC name and Trent's status as the sole managing member. I placed that file next to the mortgage document. Finally, I logged into my banking portal. I pulled the routing history for the $30,000 transfer, matching the timestamps and account numbers to prove the exact origin and destination of the funds. I was building a dossier. When you deal with people who lie to protect their social standing, you do not bring accusations to a negotiation. You bring receipts. The silence of the office was broken by the sharp, rhythmic buzzing of my phone on the desk. The screen illuminated the dim room. It was the bridal party group chat. The notifications stacked up in rapid succession. Savannah was typing. I picked up the device. The messages were no longer veiled in southern sweetness. The polite facade from the Highland Park Bistro evaporated the moment I walked out the door, leaving only the raw, desperate entitlement underneath. You cannot just walk out of a vision brunch. Everyone is asking what is wrong with you. You are ruining my timeline. I watched the text bubbles appear one after another, driven by the panic of a bride who knew her funding source was walking away. A new message popped up, this one sent directly to me outside the group thread. I need the confirmation numbers for the villa by tomorrow. Do not make this about you. You have the money. Stop acting like a child and just book it. Savannah sent a single question mark right after. The demand hung in the digital space, arrogant and uncompromising. She wanted her cliffside villa. She wanted her private yacht. She wanted her sister to quietly absorb the cost of a fraudulent life. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the need to call my father and ask why he signed away our heritage. The time for emotional confrontation had passed. My family treated my life like a balance sheet. They stripped the assets and hid the liabilities. I decided in that sterile office high above the Dallas streets to speak their language. I aligned the 3 digital documents on my screen and prepared to close the ledger. The screen of my phone illuminated the shadows of my office, a rhythmic pulse of incoming hostility. Savannah had bypassed the bridal party thread and returned to our core family group chat. The audience here was intimate, consisting only of Caroline, Richard, Savannah, and me. This was the specific arena where my compliance had been manufactured for a decade. The messages arrived in rapid bursts, the digital equivalent of a temper tantrum. She started with accusations of jealousy. Then she moved to guilt, leveraging my absence at the brunch as a personal attack on her happiness. Finally, she deployed the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, the blunt force of entitled superiority. Her final text arrived in capital letters. "You are 24, single, and selfish. Pay for the trip. It is literally pocket change for you." In the past, an attack like that would have unraveled my composure. I would have drafted a dozen responses trying to explain my perspective, begging to be understood by a family determined to misunderstand me. I would have typed out paragraphs detailing how hard I worked for that pocket change, how many weekends I sacrificed to build my firm while she was touring vineyards and trying on designer gowns. But defending yourself to someone committed to treating you like a financial utility is a waste of resources. Savannah did not care about my feelings. She cared about her itinerary. Caroline did not care about my boundaries. She cared about the optics of a canceled yacht charter. Engaging with them emotionally was playing a rigged game on a board they controlled. If I replied with anger, I became the hysterical little sister. If I replied with hurt, I played the victim. The only way to dismantle a system built on illusions is to introduce an undisputed fact. I ignored the keyboard on my phone and turned my attention back to the dual monitors on my desk. The digital dossier was ready. I needed to present it in a format that could not be scrolled past, deleted, or deliberately misinterpreted. I opened a blank canvas in my photo editing software. Finding hidden information is my profession, and I know how to direct the human eye to the most critical piece of data. I dragged the PDF of the secondary deed of trust onto the canvas. I cropped the document to highlight the address of our ancestral ranch, the staggering loan amount, and the undeniable signatures of my parents. The legacy they swore to protect was sitting in a bank vault, traded away for catering deposits and floral arrangements. Below the mortgage document, I placed the wire transfer receipt from my emergency joint account. I circled the routing number and the exact sum of $30,000 departing my ledger. Beside the receipt, I placed the commercial real estate warranty deed. I highlighted Trent's name as the sole managing member of the holding company and the cash down payment that perfectly matched the stolen funds. The composition was elegant in its devastation. It was a single, high-resolution image that told the entire story of their financial treason. There was no room for denial. There was no ambiguity. It was a receipt for a stolen future. Savannah was trading her family home for a man who refused to put her name on a property deed. The composition was elegant in its devastation. It was a single, high-resolution image that told the entire story of their financial treason. There was no room for denial. There was no ambiguity. It was a receipt for a stolen future. Savannah was trading her family home for a man who refused to put her name on a property deed. Caroline was facilitating the theft to ensure the right families attended a party. Richard was signing the documents because he lacked the spine to tell his wife no. I exported the file and transferred it to my phone. The family group chat was still vibrating with Savannah's escalating demands. Caroline had chimed in, offering a velvet reprimand about how my behavior was causing undue stress on the bride during a delicate time. Richard remained predictably silent, observing the chaos without intervening, just as he had done for my entire life. I uploaded the screenshot to the thread. I did not add a paragraph of hurt feelings. I did not demand an apology for the theft of my emergency fund. I typed a single calculated caption. I am not funding a vacation when the ranch is facing foreclosure to pay for a condo Trent owns exclusively. Have a nice trip. I hit send. The message delivered. The read receipts appeared almost instantly. First Caroline, then Savannah, then Richard. I did not wait for the typing bubbles to surface. I swiped down on my screen and activated the Do Not Disturb function. The phone went dark and silent, a piece of inert glass and metal on the polished surface of my desk. I closed my laptop, packed my briefcase, and left the uptown office. I drove back to my condo in the fading Dallas twilight. The Texas heat was breaking, giving way to a cool evening breeze. The drive felt fundamentally different than it had that morning. The crushing weight of unacknowledged obligation, a burden I had carried since I was a teenager, had evaporated. The air in the car felt light. I unlocked my front door, walked into my kitchen, and took a clean glass from the cabinet. I filled it with ice and filtered water. The condo was perfectly quiet. The silence was not empty. It felt like sovereignty. I stood by the kitchen island, taking a slow sip of the cold water, watching the city lights begin to glitter through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I knew the peace was temporary. A house of cards makes a specific sound when it collapses, and I had just pulled out the foundation. My phone remained dark on the counter. The digital fallout was happening without my participation. Savannah was likely staring at the proof of Trent's deception, realizing the luxury condo was not a shared marital asset. Caroline was likely realizing her secret mortgage was no longer a secret. The shame of their insolvency laid bare. Richard was likely wishing he could retreat to his study and lock the door. They were trapped in a reality they could no longer finance with my money. Exactly 10 minutes later, the tranquility shattered. The sharp screech of tires echoed from the driveway below my unit. Car doors slammed with enough force to rattle the exterior hinges of the building. Footsteps charged up the outdoor stairwell, heavy and chaotic, stumbling over the concrete steps in a rush. Then came the frantic, relentless pounding on my front door. The pounding rattled the brass fixtures of my front door. It was a rapid, uneven rhythm, the sound of people losing control. I did not rush to answer. I set my glass of water on the kitchen island, taking a moment to wipe a stray drop of condensation from the marble. From a drawer beneath the counter, I retrieved a standard manila folder. I had printed the digital dossier at the office before leaving, anticipating this exact arrival. Families built on secrets always rush the stage when the curtain drops. They demand an audience to validate their panic. I walked to the entryway and turned the deadbolt. I swung the door open, but only halfway, bracing my body squarely in the frame. I had no intention of letting them inside. My condo was a sanctuary, and they brought chaos. Savannah stood on the landing, her face flushed red, clutching her designer purse like a weapon. Caroline flanked her, eyes darting left and right toward the neighboring units, terrified someone might witness this unraveling. Richard lingered a few steps behind them on the concrete stairs, staring at his loafers, looking like a man marching to his own execution. The humid Texas night air clung to them, magnifying their desperation. Savannah spoke first. Her voice was sharp and frantic, echoing in the quiet breezeway of the complex. "You hacked my fiancé," Savannah yelled, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You hacked his business accounts. This is a federal crime, Larissa. I am calling the police. I am pressing charges." Caroline placed a hand on Savannah's arm, hushing her loudly. "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed. "The Miller family lives 2 doors down, and they are on the country club admission board. Larissa, open this door right now so we can discuss this inside like civilized people." I did not step back. I looked at the 3 of them, observing the panic radiating from their postures. They expected a hysterical fight. They expected me to scream, to cry about the stolen money, to beg for an explanation. They wanted an emotional brawl because emotions can be manipulated. Facts cannot. I kept my voice low, adopting the flat, steady cadence I use when a software vendor breaches a contract. "We are not discussing anything inside," I said. Savannah pushed forward, trying to leverage her weight against the door. "You are insane. Trent is going to sue you for invasion of privacy. Where did you get those documents? You have no right to look into his private investments." I shifted my focus to my father. He had remained silent, hiding behind the noise of the women he allowed to run his life. I extended my hand, offering him the manila folder. "Take this," I said. Richard hesitated, then reached out. His fingers trembled slightly as he took the folder. "Open it," I instructed. He flipped back the cover. The printed copies of the secondary deed of trust and the commercial warranty deed stared back at him. The paper trail of his cowardice was bound in a neat chronological stack. "I did not hack anyone," I explained, keeping my tone surgical. "The warranty deed for Trent's luxury condominium is a public record filed with the county clerk. Anyone with an internet connection and $20 can pull it. The secondary mortgage on the ranch is also a public document. As for the $30,000 you took to secure Trent's down payment, that was a joint account. My name is on the ledger, my social security number is attached to the routing sequence. When you wire $30,000 out of an account I monitor, the bank sends me a notification. You left a trail a high school accounting student could follow." Savannah's face lost a fraction of its color. She looked at the folder in our father's hands, then back at me. Her narrative of being the victim of a cybercrime evaporated, leaving her with the undeniable reality that she was marrying a grifter who excluded her from his real estate portfolio. The money she took from me was sitting in an asset she did not own. Caroline stepped forward, replacing Savannah's aggression with a seasoned, weaponized guilt. Her voice trembled, a practiced quiver she perfected over decades of fundraising galas. "Larissa, you do not understand how these things work," Caroline said, her eyes wide and pleading. "We did this for the image of our family. Trent's parents expect a certain caliber of event. We were trying to protect Savannah. You are ruining your sister's special time over a simple miscommunication about borrowed funds." A simple miscommunication. She stole my safety net, mortgaged my childhood home, and labeled the betrayal an administrative error. She thought maternal pressure would force me to fold, that I would apologize for catching them stealing. I cut her off. My voice possessed no warmth. "Do not frame theft as a familial duty," I said. "You drained my emergency fund to buy your future son-in-law a bachelor pad. You leveraged a multi-generational property to pay for imported orchids and custom ice sculptures. You lied to my face at brunch." Caroline gasped, clutching the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. "How dare you speak to your mother this way? We gave you everything." "You took everything," I corrected, "and now you get nothing." Savannah scoffed, crossing her arms again to protect her fragile ego. "Fine, keep your precious $50,000. Trent will just pay for the Bali trip himself. He has plenty of capital." I looked at Savannah, feeling a brief clinical pity. She truly did not understand the gravity of her situation. She still believed Trent was a titan of industry, despite the documents sitting right in front of her, proving he needed her stolen $30,000 to close on a basic condo. "This is not just about Bali, Savannah," I said. I turned my attention back to my parents. I spent the last 3 hours ensuring my financial infrastructure is secure. I froze my credit with all 3 major bureaus. I removed my name and my social security number from every childhood checking and savings account we shared. I revoked Caroline's authorization on my corporate profiles. Caroline's mouth dropped open. "But the country club dues are tied to that profile." "You will have to provide a new payment method to the membership committee," I replied, watching the social panic register in her eyes. Then I delivered the final, fatal blow to their illusions. I looked directly at Savannah. I also called American Express. I reported an unauthorized fraudulent charge on my corporate card. Savannah uncrossed her arms, her posture dropping. "What charge?" "The venue deposit," I stated. "The $80,000 securing your date at the Hill Country Estate. The contract was signed in your name, but the merchant processed my corporate card. That violates the cardholder agreement. American Express initiated a chargeback. The funds have been pulled from the venue's merchant account and returned to my ledger." The breezeway went dead silent. The crickets in the nearby landscaping seemed to echo in the quiet night air. Savannah stared at me, her eyes widening as the math calculated in her head. "You canceled my venue," she whispered, the hostility draining out of her, replaced by unfiltered terror. "I did not cancel anything," I replied. "I simply reclaimed my stolen property. The venue still has your reservation. They will just require a new payment method from the contract holder within their standard grace period. I believe their policy mandates a replacement wire transfer within 48 hours of a bounce deposit, or they release the date to the public." Savannah turned to Richard, her voice cracking, pleading with the man who had enabled this disaster. Dad, tell her to fix this. Tell her to put the card back on file. We cannot lose the estate. The invitations are already printed. The governor is attending." Richard looked up from the manila folder. His face was ashen, the skin pulled tight across his jaw. He looked at his eldest daughter, the pageant queen he had bankrupted himself to please, and for the first time in his life, he had no solution to offer. "We do not have $80,000, Savannah," he said, his voice hollow. "We do not have any dollars." Savannah stumbled back a step, gripping the iron railing of the stairwell for support. The reality she had ignored for months finally crashed over her. Her wedding was effectively unfunded. The luxury spectacle she promised her high society peers was built on vapor, and the only person capable of materializing the cash was standing behind a locked door, refusing to participate. Caroline began to hyperventilate in earnest, her manicured hands covering her face. The social disgrace of a canceled society wedding was a fate worse than death in her circle. She looked at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, begging silently for a rescue I would never deliver. "You brought this on yourselves," I said. "I will not fund a fraud." I stepped back and pushed the heavy door closed. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp metallic finality. I did not stay by the entryway to listen to the weeping on the other side. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my glass of water, and took a slow sip. The immediate ambush was neutralized, but standing in the quiet of my condo, I knew this was only the first wave. My parents possessed keys to my home. They held legacy vendor accounts under my corporate umbrella. A locked door was merely a physical barrier. To truly sever the ties of a family that viewed me as a utility, I needed to build a fortress of paperwork. Before the sun rose tomorrow, I would have to systematically dismantle every remaining access point they had to my life. The morning after a fracture does not have to be a tragedy. I woke up at 6 o'clock, poured a cup of black coffee, and watched the sunrise reflect off the glass facades of the downtown Dallas skyscrapers. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the heavy, hollow ache that usually follows a family confrontation. I felt the crisp, unyielding focus of a founder who had just identified a catastrophic vulnerability in her business model and was preparing to patch the breach. My family had operated under the assumption that my wealth was their birthright. They believed my youth made me pliable, and my desire for their approval made me blind. They were incorrect on both counts. I was done negotiating with people who viewed my bank account as a communal asset. I did not waste my morning feeling sad. I went into full lockdown mode, transforming my life into an administrative fortress. The first perimeter was physical. At 7 in the morning, I called a commercial security firm. A technician arrived within the hour. He wore a crisp gray uniform and asked no questions as he removed the smart lock from my front door. He installed a new high-grade biometric deadbolt and reprogrammed the building access fob. For years, Caroline and Richard possessed the codes to my home, dropping by unannounced whenever they needed me to co-sign a document or fix a tech issue. I watched the technician hand me the new primary access card. The physical barrier was established. The second perimeter was social. In our zip code, standing is dictated by where you dine and who signs the check. 2 years ago, I purchased a corporate membership at an exclusive country club. I needed a venue to entertain prospective clients and host quarterly strategy dinners. Caroline, whose own social currency had stagnated when my father stepped back from his career, saw my membership as a lifeline. She begged to be added as a designated family guest. I agreed, assuming she would use it for an occasional tennis match or a quiet lunch. Instead, Caroline used my corporate account to resurrect her status as a high society matriarch. She hosted weekly luncheons on the terrace, reserving the best tables and charging premium champagne to my ledger. She allowed her peers to believe she was the primary member, basking in the prestige of an institution she could never afford to join on her own. It was a classic Caroline maneuver, leveraging my assets to build her illusion. I sat at my kitchen island, logged into the member portal on my laptop, and navigated to the Authorized User tab. My mother's name sat near the top of the screen, right below my own. I did not call the membership director to explain. I did not send Caroline a warning text. I simply dragged my cursor to the small box beside her name and clicked Revoke. The screen refreshed. Her profile disappeared. The system generated an automated email notifying her that her gate access and charging privileges were terminated effectively immediately. There is a profound, icy satisfaction in letting paperwork do the punishing. When you argue with toxic people, they twist your words. They weaponize your tone. They turn every emotional reaction into evidence of your instability. But a revoked authorization is silent. A canceled credit card does not raise its voice. Every boundary I built that morning was a legal or financial firewall, impervious to guilt trips or maternal tears. The administration of consequence is infinitely more liberating than the exhaustion of a fight. The third perimeter was the wedding itself. Savannah's bridal party group chat had likely been a war zone all night, but my phone remained on Do Not Disturb. I refused to wade into a swamp of digital hysteria. I needed to officially remove myself from the narrative, not as a wounded sister, but as a professional dissolving a toxic partnership. I opened my email client and drafted a new message. I typed Savannah's address in the primary field and copied Caroline the wedding planner and every bridesmaid from the Highland Park Bistro. I kept my posture straight and my breathing even. I did not mention the stolen $30,000. I did not mention Trent's secret luxury condominium or the secondary mortgage on the ranch. Giving them an emotional explanation would only provide them with a script to debate. I wrote exactly 2 sentences. Due to unforeseen financial restructuring, I am formally withdrawing from my role as maid of honor and stepping down from all wedding-related commitments. I wish Savannah and Trent the best in their future endeavors. I proofread the text to ensure the tone was immaculate and corporate. I pressed send. The message vanished into the digital ether, delivering my resignation to the inboxes of Dallas's most prominent young socialites. I closed the laptop, feeling a genuine sense of weightlessness. The administrative guillotine had fallen. I severed the accounts, locked the doors, and formally resigned from their theater production. I was a free woman. I expected the fallout to be swift. I assumed my father would call to negotiate, or Savannah would attempt to force her way into my building lobby. I prepared myself for a barrage of voicemails, pleading for a compromise, promising that Trent would pay the money back or that Caroline would secure a loan to cover the canceled venue deposit. But the morning passed in total silence. Noon arrived without a single missed call from my parents. The afternoon stretched on quiet and undisturbed. It took me a few hours to realize the silence was not a surrender. It was a pivot. Carolyn is a creature of the social ecosystem. She understands that if you cannot control the money, you must control the narrative. She knew she could not force me to unfreeze the accounts or reinstate her country club privileges. I had locked her out of the bank. But she still had access to the rumor mill, and in her world, reputation is just as valuable as liquid cash. If she could not manipulate me in private, she would attempt to destroy me in public, hoping the sheer pressure of societal shame would force me back into submission. The first indicator arrived at 3 in the afternoon. My phone buzzed on the counter with a text message from a woman named Victoria, a senior partner at a local public relations firm and a peripheral family friend. Victoria and I rarely spoke outside of charity galas, making her sudden outreach highly unusual. I unlocked the screen and read her message. "Larissa, darling, your mother just called me. She sounds heartbroken. I heard about your sudden breakdown. Please let me know if you need recommendations for a private facility. We all want you to get the help you need before the wedding." I stared at the text, the cool satisfaction of my morning dissolving into a sharp, focused realization. Caroline was not apologizing. She was not scrambling to fix the mortgage on the ranch or confront Trent about his fraudulent real estate portfolio. She was calling her high society network and telling them her youngest daughter was suffering from a severe mental health crisis. She was spinning a story where my financial boundaries were the result of a paranoid, nervous breakdown. She was laying the groundwork for a smear campaign designed to invalidate my actions and preserve her own status. She wanted Dallas to believe I was unstable, turning my quiet exit into a public spectacle. The financial firewalls were secure, but the reputational warfare had just begun. The text from Victoria was merely the opening volley. In the wealthy enclaves of Texas, gossip is not a casual pastime. It is a highly regulated currency traded over iced teas at charity luncheons and weaponized to protect the established hierarchy. By Tuesday morning, the narrative my mother spun had saturated the Park Cities. My phone screen became a rotating exhibit of polite but probing inquiries from extended relatives, family friends, and local business owners. Caroline did not call me a thief. That would invite questions she could not answer. Instead, she deployed a much more sophisticated strategy. She cast me as a tragic figure. I read a message from my great-aunt detailing her prayers for my mental fortitude. I received an email from my former high school tennis coach offering the name of a discreet holistic therapist in Sedona. A prominent local interior designer, who often partnered with Caroline, sent a long, unsolicited text about the importance of family forgiveness and stepping away from the screens. The story Caroline and Savannah circulated was a masterpiece of Southern passive aggression. They claimed I was suffering from new money burnout. According to their script, the pressure of running a tech firm at 24 had fractured my grip on reality. I had suffered a nervous breakdown freezing the family accounts out of clinical paranoia. To add a layer of sympathetic tragedy, they whispered that my condition was exacerbated by a deep, unresolved jealousy over Savannah finding true love. I sat at my kitchen island, scrolling through the incoming messages. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Caroline was leveraging the stigma of mental illness to cover her own financial fraud. She needed a reason to explain why Savannah's spectacular wedding was suddenly hemorrhaging vendors, and a mentally unstable sister hoarding the family resources provided the perfect scapegoat. I had spent my entire life trying to earn Caroline's approval by funding her lifestyle. I paid for her galas. I bought her the prestige she craved. Now, the moment I closed the ledger, she was willing to destroy my reputation to protect a lie. She was not just trying to force me back into submission. She was trying to strip away my credibility so that if I ever told the truth, nobody would believe me. The smear campaign did not stay confined to the country club set. Dallas is a big city, but the circles of power are remarkably small. The overlap between Caroline's social network and my professional client base was a vulnerability I usually managed with careful networking. By Wednesday afternoon, that vulnerability was exploited. I had a pitch meeting scheduled with the marketing director of a regional luxury retail chain. Securing their account would boost my firm's quarterly revenue by 30%. I spent weeks preparing the data models. I walked into their glass-walled conference room in Uptown, prepared to discuss data acquisition pipelines and conversion metrics. The marketing director, a woman in her late 50s, who served on several philanthropic boards with Caroline, greeted me with a look of cautious pity. We sat down at the mahogany table. I opened my presentation, handing her a bound copy of the projections. Before I could launch into the analytics, she placed her hand over my portfolio. "Larissa, we can reschedule this if you need time," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "I saw your mother at the Symphony Gala Planning Committee last night. She mentioned the family trouble. We all know how demanding a growing business can be, especially for someone your age. There is no shame in taking a step back to focus on your wellness." I looked at her hand resting on my meticulously prepared pitch deck. The sting of betrayal hit me in the center of my chest, a cold and hollow sensation that radiated out to my fingertips. My mother was willing to burn down my company, the single thing I built with my own hands, just to ensure she did not look foolish in front of her friends. She was actively sabotaging my livelihood to maintain the illusion of Savannah's perfect wedding. The business I nurtured from a dorm room was now collateral damage in Caroline's desperate attempt to save face. I did not flinch. I did not attempt to defend my sanity to a prospective client. I maintained eye contact, offered a warm, steady smile, and gently removed her hand from my portfolio. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, my tone radiating professional calm. "My mother is prone to dramatics regarding wedding planning, as I am sure you understand. I assure you my focus is entirely on scaling your retail footprint. Shall we look at the third quarter projections?" I steered the conversation back to the data. I delivered the pitch flawlessly. I walked out of the conference room with a tentative agreement for a second meeting, but the victory felt brittle. I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my heart beating a fast, angry rhythm against my ribs. I returned to my office and locked the door. The temptation to fight back was a physical pressure in my throat. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Dallas traffic, feeling the urge to burn everything to the ground. I wanted to open my social media profiles and upload the entire digital dossier. I wanted to post the secondary deed of trust, the wire transfer receipt, and the warranty deed for Trent's condominium. I wanted to tag Caroline Savannah and every high society matriarch in Dallas. I wanted to watch their pristine reputations incinerate in real time. I walked back to my desk and opened a blank browser tab. I rested my fingers on the keyboard. The screenshot that sent them into a panic was sitting on my desktop, ready to be broadcast to the world. I could ruin them with a single click. But I paused. I looked at the blinking cursor. I remembered a fundamental rule of business one that had guided me through brutal contract negotiations and hostile client acquisitions. Never fight a public relations war in the mud. When you roll in the dirt with people who have nothing to lose, you only succeed in getting dirty. Caroline and Savannah thrived in the mud. They understood gossip, insinuation, and emotional manipulation better than anyone else. If I posted the receipts online, I would look vindictive. I would become the bitter, unstable sister they were claiming I was. The country club elites would tut and shake their heads at my tacky public display. A true tactician does not interrupt their opponent when they are making a mistake. Caroline was building a narrative based on my supposed instability. She was telling the entire city that I was unfit to manage my own affairs, all while relying on the hope that I would eventually cave and hand over the money for the wedding. She was constructing a trap for herself. If she wanted to play the role of the beleaguered mother dealing with a financially unstable daughter, I would give her exactly what she asked for. I closed the browser tab. I would not engage in a digital screaming match. I would let them hang themselves with their own contracts. My mother wanted to play a game of appearances, relying on the polite fiction of her country club standing to bully me into submission. I decided to use that exact venue to call her bluff. I opened my calendar. I had a mandatory charity brunch scheduled for the following morning at the country club. It was an event I usually dreaded, a 3-hour marathon of forced smiles and silent auctions supporting a local arts initiative. Caroline and Savannah were guaranteed to be there, holding court collecting sympathy for their tragic, broken daughter and sister. They expected me to hide in my condo, too ashamed to show my face in public after the rumors they planted. I picked up my phone and confirmed my RSVP. I did not need to scream to be heard. I did not need to defend my sanity. I just needed to deliver one final piece of paperwork in an environment where Caroline could not afford to drop her smile. I left my office, went home, and picked out a tailored white suit for the morning, ready to hand my mother a bill she could never afford to pay. The Oak Room at the Country Club possesses a distinct atmosphere on Thursday mornings. It smells of fresh lilies, starched linen, and the quiet arrogance of generational wealth. The charity brunch for the Dallas Arts Initiative was in full swing when I handed my keys to the valet. The dining room hummed with the synchronized clinking of heavy silverware against fine china. This was Caroline's preferred theater. She thrived in spaces where status was measured by the proximity of your seating arrangement to the keynote speaker. I walked through the double mahogany doors wearing the tailored white suit I selected the night before. I did not look like a woman suffering a nervous breakdown. I looked like a founder who had just closed a successful seed round. The posture you adopt in a room full of predators dictates how they treat you. I kept my shoulders back, my chin level, and my expression pleasantly detached. My mother and sister were seated at a prime table near the terrace windows, surrounded by a captive audience of local socialites. Patricia, a prominent gallery owner, and Victoria, the public relations executive, who texted me yesterday, were leaning in close. Savannah was holding a mimosa, her engagement ring flashing in the morning light. She wore an expression of brave, tragic resilience. I approached the table from the blind spot behind Caroline, moving silently across the thick carpet. I arrived just in time to hear Savannah finishing her performance. "So we had to cancel the flights to Bali," Savannah said, her voice dropping into a register of practiced sorrow. "It breaks my heart, but we are just going to do a quiet weekend at a local spa instead. Larissa is going through such a dark period right now. The burnout just caught up with her and she froze all her accounts in a panic. We are just trying to be supportive while she gets the help she needs." Patricia touched her chest, a gesture of performative sympathy. "That is just awful, darling. It is so hard on the family when someone loses their grip." "It truly is a burden," Caroline sighed, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. "But family comes first. We are shielding her as best we can." "Good morning, ladies," I said. The effect was instantaneous. Caroline jumped her elbow, knocking her crystal water goblet, spilling a small puddle of ice water onto the tablecloth. Savannah stiffened, the tragic expression freezing on her face. The other women at the table looked up, their eyes darting between my immaculate white suit and the narrative they had just been fed. The dissonance was loud enough to echo. The broken, paranoid sister they were just discussing was standing before them, looking healthier and more composed than anyone else in the room. "Larissa," Victoria said, recovering her social graces first, "we were just talking about you. It is wonderful to see you out and about. You look so well." "Thank you, Victoria," I replied, pulling an empty chair from the adjacent table and sliding it right between Caroline and Savannah. "The rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. The tech sector is demanding, but I assure you my focus has never been sharper." I signaled a passing waiter and ordered a black coffee. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an apology for the lies they were spreading. I sat with perfect posture, folding my hands on the table, offering a serene smile to the audience. Caroline recovered her composure, signaling a busboy to clean up her spilled water. She offered a tight, rigid smile. "We are just surprised to see you, sweetheart. We assumed you would be resting at home today, given the circumstances." "I had a few administrative tasks to finalize," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I could not miss the Arts Initiative brunch. Besides, I brought something for you, Mother." I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and withdrew a crisp white envelope. It was sealed and stamped with the country club crest. I placed it directly on the linen tablecloth, sliding it until it rested against Caroline's saucer. The women at the table leaned forward slightly, the instinct for gossip overriding their southern manners. Savannah stared at the envelope, her eyes narrowing. She knew me well enough to recognize that I do not deliver gifts in public without a strategic reason. Caroline looked at the paper, her smile becoming brittle. "What is this, Larissa?" "Just a little paperwork," I said. "Since you were so concerned about my mental health yesterday, I decided to take your advice. I am streamlining my obligations to reduce stress." I took a slow sip of the coffee the waiter placed in front of me. The dark roast was bitter and hot. "As you know," I continued, projecting my voice just enough for the surrounding tables to catch the cadence, "my corporate membership here was initially established to entertain prospective clients. I enjoyed having you as my authorized family guest, but my accountant recently audited our firm's overhead. Having a secondary user charging personal charity luncheons to a corporate ledger is a liability I can no longer justify." Caroline's face lost a shade of color. She glanced nervously at Patricia and Victoria, the women she had spent years trying to impress. Her entire social standing was tethered to this institution. She married my father, assuming his legacy name carried endless wealth, only to discover decades ago that the family fortune was mostly tied up in the ranch dirt. She had no liquid capital of her own. For the past 2 years, she had been dining on my dime, pretending the wealth belonged to her. "Larissa, this is hardly the time or place for a financial discussion," Caroline whispered, the steel returning to her voice. "There is no discussion," I replied warmly. "I already spoke with the membership director this morning. I formally requested that your guest authorization be severed from my corporate profile. However, knowing how much you cherish your time on the terrace, I asked them to transition your profile into a primary independent membership." I tapped the envelope with my index finger. "The board approved the transition. The transfer is effective immediately. Inside is the final invoice for your initiation fee and your annual dues for the upcoming year. Since I am stepping back from my health, I knew you would want to handle your own accounts." The silence at the table was profound. The ambient noise of the dining room seemed to fade into the background. Victoria and Patricia stared at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their eggs Benedict, trying desperately to pretend they were not witnessing a social execution. Caroline's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. She did not need to open it to know the balance. The standard initiation fee for an independent membership was $10,000. The annual dues were $5,000. I had just handed her a $15,000 invoice, payable upon receipt, to an institution that would publicly revoke her access if the check bounced. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. The trap I laid was inescapable. If she refused the envelope and canceled the membership, she would have to admit to her high society peers that she could not afford the entry fee, proving she had been mooching off her daughter the entire time. If she accepted the envelope, she was on the hook for a staggering sum of money she did not possess, especially now that the ranch was leveraged and the emergency fund was gone. She was trapped by her own vanity. "You planned this?" Savannah hissed, dropping the facade of the grieving sister. Her grip on her mimosa glass tightened until her knuckles turned white. "You came here just to embarrass her." "I came here to support the arts initiative," I corrected, offering my sister a placid smile, "and to ensure Mother's accounts were in order before my supposed breakdown limits my cognitive function." I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I smoothed the lapels of my white suit, looking down at the women who had spent the last 48 hours trying to destroy my professional reputation to cover their own theft. The narrative of the hysterical, unstable daughter was dead. I had walked into their arena, spoken with absolute clarity, and handed the matriarch a bill she could not pay. "Enjoy the rest of the brunch, ladies," I said to Victoria and Patricia. "It was lovely seeing you." I turned and walked out of the oak room, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the hardwood floor of the lobby. I did not look back to see Caroline open the envelope. The visual confirmation was unnecessary. The administrative firewall was now complete, extending from my physical residence to their social standing. They were isolated, exposed, and out of funds. I stepped out into the bright Texas morning and handed my ticket to the valet. The cool satisfaction of the encounter settled in my chest, a quiet victory over the noise of their deception. But as I slid into the driver's seat of my car, my phone lit up in the center console. The caller ID displayed an unknown number from Austin. The silence was about to break again. The grace period for Savannah's venue deposit was expiring, and the logistics of her fraudulent wedding were about to collide with reality. I stared at the unknown Austin area code flashing on my center console. I let it ring. I knew exactly who it was, and I had no intention of answering the accounts receivable department for a historic hill country estate. I shifted my car into drive and merged onto the highway heading back to my office. By the time I hit the first traffic light, the Austin number stopped calling. 10 seconds later, Savannah's name lit up the screen. The grace period was officially over. I pressed the accept button on the steering wheel, routing the call through the audio system. I did not say hello. I just let the silence stretch across the cellular connection. For the first time in my life, I heard my sister sound genuinely terrified. The polished, pageant-ready cadence she used to command a room vanished. In its place was the jagged, breathless panic of a woman watching her future evaporate.
They canceled it,
Savannah gasped, her voice cracking over the speakers. "Larissa, they just called me, the estate manager. She said the $80,000 deposit was flagged by American Express as corporate fraud. They reversed the charge. The money is gone." "The money was returned to its rightful ledger," I corrected, keeping my tone as even as the highway lines passing beneath my tires. "The venue contract is in your name. The billing information utilized a corporate credit card registered to an entity you do not own or operate. That is the definition of unauthorized use. The fraud department simply did their job." "You have to fix this," she sobbed. The sound was raw, devoid of the manipulative tears she usually deployed. This was sheer desperation. "The manager told me I have exactly 48 hours to wire the replacement funds. If the money is not in their merchant account by Saturday morning, they release my date to the wait list. I lose the venue. The invitations are in the mail. Please, Larissa, you cannot do this to me." When we were children, Savannah possessed a remarkable talent for breaking things and avoiding the consequences. She would borrow my favorite sweaters, ruin them, and somehow convince our mother that I had given her permission to destroy my belongings. She operated under the assumption that the world would always bend to accommodate her mistakes. She expected me to bend right now. "I am not doing anything to you," I replied. "I am simply refusing to participate in a financial structure that requires my exploitation." "You stole my emergency fund, Savannah. You mortgaged the ranch." Then came the pivot. When entitlement failed and guilt trips collapsed, my sister resorted to the final tactic in her playbook. She dropped the high society attitude and began to beg. "I am sorry." She wept the words, stumbling over each other. "I am so sorry. We should not have touched the joint account. We were just so stressed about the vendor minimums, and Trent said we could replace the $30,000 after the wedding gifts cleared. We were going to tell you, I promise, just give the venue your card number again. Please, I will do whatever you want. I will apologize in front of everyone. Just save my wedding." I listened to her hollow apologies fill the cabin of my car. An apology born of consequence is not a genuine admission of guilt. It is just a negotiation tactic. She was not sorry for taking the money. She was sorry the venue caught her without a backup plan. I let her cry for a moment, analyzing the shifting dynamics of our relationship. The power structure had inverted. The golden child was reduced to begging the scapegoat for a financial pardon. I decided to test the waters of her honesty. If she was willing to tell the truth, perhaps there was a sliver of sisterhood left to salvage. "You need $80,000 in 48 hours, I said. "Where is Trent in all of this? He's your fiancé. He's the son of a legacy commercial developer. Why are you begging your younger sister for a venue deposit when the man you're marrying supposedly manages a real estate empire?" The crying abruptly stopped. The silence on the line grew thick and defensive. Even in the midst of a catastrophic crisis, Savannah felt the instinct to protect the illusion of her perfect relationship. "Trent cannot liquidate right now," Savannah said, her voice tightening, reverting to the practiced script she likely rehearsed in the mirror. "His money is tied up in investments. Commercial real estate is not a liquid asset class, Larissa. He has capital wrapped up in acquisitions and zoning permits. You run a tech firm. You should understand how cash flow works." "I understand cash flow perfectly," I replied, merging into the exit lane for Uptown. "I understand that a man who cannot produce $80,000 for his own wedding should not be purchasing luxury condominiums." "We needed a place to live," she argued, the desperation creeping back into her tone. "The down payment was an investment in our future." "Your future," I repeated. "Are you certain about that?" "What are you talking about?" she demanded. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my office building, the concrete walls dampening the outside noise. I parked the car, turned off the engine, but kept the battery running to maintain the Bluetooth connection. It was time to pull the thread on the fiancé. My family had treated me like a silent bank, but Trent was the architect of their current insolvency. He was the reason the emergency fund vanished. "I run data for a living, Savannah," I said, leaning back against the leather headrest. When I saw the $30,000 missing from my ledger, I did not just look at the routing number. I ran a background trace on the destination. I looked at the holding company Trent registered. "Trent is a private person," she snapped. "His business filings are none of your concern." They became my concern the moment my money funded them, I countered. You told me the condo was an investment in your marital future. You told our parents you were building equity together. But I pulled the warranty deed from the county clerk. Your name is nowhere on that property. You have no legal claim to that real estate. He is adding me to the deed after we get married, she insisted, though her voice shook with a sudden, creeping doubt. It is a standard tax strategy for his LLC. It is not a tax strategy, I said gently. It is a grift. Excuse me. I dug deeper into the LLC this morning, I explained, delivering the final piece of the puzzle I had uncovered before the country club brunch. Trent is not the sole managing member of that holding company, Savannah. There is a co-signer on the Articles of Organization. Someone else holds 50% equity in that luxury condominium. That is impossible, Savannah whispered. It is his private holding firm. His father set it up. His father has nothing to do with it, I stated. The co-signer on the LLC is a woman named Sarah Kensington. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the faint hum of the car battery. I waited for her to process the name. Sarah Kensington was not a business partner. She was not a relative. Sarah was Trent's ex-girlfriend, a woman he supposedly broke up with 3 years ago, before he started dating my sister. That is a lie, Savannah choked out, though the conviction in her voice was absent. Public records do not lie, I said. You stole $30,000 from your family to secure a luxury apartment for your fiancé and his ex-girlfriend. Your wedding is unfunded because the man you are marrying is siphoning your parents dry to build a life with someone else. Savannah let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob, a visceral reaction to a truth she could no longer deny. The facade she had spent years constructing, the perfect high society engagement, the wealthy developer fiancé, the envy of her peers, was all built on a foundation of systemic fraud. Caroline and Richard had mortgaged their legacy to finance a con artist. I did not wait for her to defend him. There was nothing left to debate. You have 48 hours to figure out your venue, I said. I suggest you ask Trent to liquidate. I ended the call. The dashboard screen faded to the standard menu. I sat in the dim light of the parking garage, the silence wrapping around me like a shield. My mother and sister were awful, entitled people, but they were also marks. They had been played by a man who understood their desperation for status and exploited it flawlessly. The target had shifted. The conflict was no longer just about boundaries and bank accounts. It was about exposing a predator who was currently draining the last drop of my family's heritage. I opened my car door and stepped out into the concrete garage. I had 48 hours before the venue canceled the wedding, which was exactly enough time to set a trap they could not escape. I stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet corridor to my office. The glass door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a space governed by logic and empirical evidence. I tossed my keys onto the desk, bypassed the light switch, and sat in the glow of my dual monitors. The confrontation in the parking garage had shifted the parameters of my reality. I was no longer merely defending my assets from entitled relatives. I was actively tracking a predator who had breached the perimeter of my family. My marketing firm utilizes enterprise-level data aggregation tools to build consumer profiles. We trace spending habits, property ownership, and digital footprints to predict market behavior. I repurposed those same tools, directing the algorithm away from retail demographics and aiming it directly at Trent. Trent spent the last 2 years cultivating an aura of generational prosperity. He navigated the Dallas social scene with an unearned confidence, speaking about mezzanine financing and commercial acquisitions as if he single-handedly shaped the city skyline. Savannah fell in love with the portfolio he projected. Caroline endorsed the union because the surname carried historical weight in local real estate circles. I accessed the Texas Comptroller database and pulled the franchise tax reports for his father's legacy development company. The truth was stark and undeniable. The firm had not broken ground on a new commercial property in 8 years. Their primary revenue stream consisted of liquidating aging strip malls to cover mounting operational debts. The corporate entity was a hollow shell coasting on the fumes of past success. Trent was not the heir to an expanding empire. He was the beneficiary of a sinking ship surviving on credit extensions and the polite assumptions of his country club peers. A failing family business was a common tragedy. The holding company and the luxury condominium, however, constituted a deliberate crime. I opened a secondary portal to investigate the limited liability company Savannah had unknowingly funded. I had already identified Sarah Kensington as the co-signer on the Articles of Organization. Now I needed to understand the current nature of their relationship. I ran a skip trace on Sarah, pulling her recent utility registrations, voter records, and vehicle registration data. The results loaded in a neat chronological column. 3 weeks ago, on the exact day Trent closed on the downtown condominium using my stolen $30,000, Sarah Kensington transferred her vehicle registration to that precise address. 2 days later, she established an internet service account for the unit. She was not a silent business partner. She was the primary resident. Trent was actively cohabitating with his ex-girlfriend in a property financed by his current fiancée. The architecture of his grift was breathtaking in its audacity. Trent identified my family as the perfect mark. He recognized Caroline's desperate need for social validation and Savannah's vanity. He knew they would never demand a forensic accounting of his assets, because doing so would violate the unspoken rules of polite Southern society. He isolated Savannah, encouraging her taste for exorbitant wedding expenses, knowing my parents would leverage their own stability to cover the deficit. He was bleeding them dry to build a separate life across town. I leaned back in my chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in the dark office window. The ethical dilemma before me was heavy and complex. A significant part of my mind argued for absolute silence. Caroline had spent the morning orchestrating a calculated smear campaign, telling the most influential women in the city that I was suffering a psychotic break. Savannah had stolen my emergency funds and hurled insults at me when I refused to subsidize her luxury vacation. Richard had surrendered the deed to my childhood home rather than stand up to his wife. They had earned their ruin. I could simply book a flight to Europe, turn off my phone, and let the 48-hour grace period expire. The venue would cancel the wedding, the social humiliation would break Caroline, the bank would eventually foreclose on the ranch when my parents defaulted on the predatory secondary mortgage. Savannah would inevitably discover Trent's dual life when the money ran out and the illusion shattered. It would be a brutal, poetic justice. They treated me like a disposable utility. Leaving them to drown in the consequences of their own vanity was the most logical outcome. But another thought anchored me to the desk. I thought about the ranch. The property in the hill country was not just collateral for a catering bill. It was the soil my grandfather worked with his own hands. It was 3 generations of Texas history, a legacy built on sweat and resilience long before Caroline arrived to coat it in country club veneer. Letting a con artist walk away with the equity of my ancestral home felt like a betrayal of my own bloodline, independent of how poorly my parents treated me. Furthermore, my mother and sister were vain, entitled, and cruel. But in this specific equation, they were victims. They were marks caught in a sophisticated confidence game. Trent had weaponized their deepest insecurities against them. The fixer in me, the same instinct that drove me to build a company from nothing and solve complex data problems, refused to let an outsider dismantle my family foundation for his own profit. I could walk away from my family, but I would not let Trent profit from their destruction. I decided to intervene. I would not do it with a heartfelt conversation over coffee. I would not bring the evidence to the ranch where Caroline could retreat to her bedroom and Savannah could throw a tantrum. I needed an environment engineered for absolute accountability, a space where polite society rules held no jurisdiction and appearances offered zero protection. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct line for my corporate attorney, a senior partner at a firm in downtown Dallas. He answered on the second ring despite the late hour. I explained that I required use of his primary conference room the following morning. I requested that he draft a specific set of legally binding agreements based on a transfer of real estate equity. He asked no questions, accustomed to my sudden structural demands. Once the legal staging ground was secured, I opened my email client. I created a calendar invitation for an emergency financial restructuring meeting. I added Caroline, Richard, Savannah, and Trent to the guest list. The location was set to the law firm. In the body of the email, I drafted a concise ultimatum. I stated that I possessed a solution to the canceled venue deposit and the secondary mortgage on the ranch. However, the offer was contingent upon their mandatory attendance at the specified location tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Failure to attend or failure to bring Trent would result in my permanent withdrawal from all family financial matters. I read over the text to ensure the tone was sterile and commanding. There were no emotional pleas. There were no hints about what I had discovered regarding the condominium or the ex-girlfriend. I relied entirely on their desperation to secure the venue deposit. They needed cash, and I was the only remaining source of liquidity. They would show up because they had no other options. I hit send. The trap was set. The final confrontation would not happen in a living room or a country club terrace. It would happen in a room designed for depositions and ironclad contracts. I was going to unmask the predator, save the ranch, and close the ledger on my family forever. The 42nd floor of my corporate attorney's firm offers an unobstructed panoramic view of the Dallas skyline. The primary conference room is an exercise in psychological architecture. The space is anchored by a 20-foot table carved from a single slab of polished walnut. The chairs are heavy black leather. The soundproofing is flawless, eliminating the hum of the city traffic below and leaving only the quiet, sterile silence of high-stakes negotiations. It is not a room built for emotional outbursts or maternal guilt trips. It is a room designed to strip away illusions and finalize contracts. I arrived 30 minutes early. My attorney David sat to my right. David is a man whose hourly rate reflects his talent for dismantling hostile corporate takeovers. He arranged 4 identical leather-bound binders in a neat stack on the wood surface. We did not speak. The strategy was already set. Precisely at 10 in the morning, the receptionist opened the heavy glass doors. My family entered the boardroom, bringing the anxious, desperate energy of a collapsing dynasty into a space engineered for clinical execution. Trent led the procession. He crossed the threshold with the relaxed rolling gait of a man who believed he owned the room before he even pulled out a chair. He wore a bespoke navy suit that draped flawlessly across his shoulders, the fabric catching the recessed lighting. A heavy gold chronograph watch slipped out from under his starched French cuff as he adjusted his lapel. He projected the effortless confidence of generational wealth. Looking at him, I realized he was quite literally wearing my stolen emergency fund. Savannah trailed closely behind her fiancé, her fingers gripping the handle of her handbag until her knuckles turned white. Despite the devastating phone call we shared the previous evening, she was clinging to a desperate, fragile hope. She brought Trent to this meeting, hoping he could charm his way out of the accusations, or hoping I would simply slide a check across the table and make the nightmare disappear. She refused to look me in the eye. Caroline entered next, her posture rigid. She wore a conservative tweed jacket and a strand of pearls, attempting to project maternal authority in a room where she held zero leverage. Richard followed her, closing the glass door. My father looked pale, his shoulders rounded, carrying the invisible weight of the predatory mortgage he signed behind my back. They took their seats on the opposite side of the walnut table. Caroline immediately attempted to dictate the terms of the engagement. She smoothed her skirt, offered David a tight, dismissive smile, and turned her attention to me. Larissa, forcing us to drive downtown on a Friday morning is highly unnecessary, she stated, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. We could have handled this over coffee at the house. Your father had to cancel his golf tee time, and Savannah is under enough strain with the venue demanding the replacement funds. I expect you are ready to resolve this misunderstanding and put the corporate card back on file. She expected a surrender. She assumed my calendar invitation was a dramatic prelude to an inevitable capitulation. Trent leaned back in his leather chair, crossing one ankle over his knee. He offered a smug, patronizing chuckle. Let us hear her out, Caroline. Larissa is just trying to feel involved in the planning process. Weddings are stressful for everyone. We appreciate you stepping up to fix the deposit glitch, Larissa. He spoke to me as if I were a recalcitrant intern who had finally corrected a spreadsheet error. His arrogance was a performance, a shield designed to deflect scrutiny. I did not react to his provocation. I kept my hands folded on the table. I am not here to apologize, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the expanse of the table, and I am not here to fix a glitch. You are sitting in this room because the Hill Country estate requires $80,000 by tomorrow morning, and you have exhausted every line of credit available to you. Caroline opened her mouth to object, her cheeks flushing with indignation at the blunt financial assessment, but I held up a hand to silence her. I am willing to provide the capital, I continued. I will wire the $80,000 to the venue merchant account today, securing the wedding date. Furthermore, I will pay off the secondary deed of trust on the ranch in full, eliminating the predatory interest rate and saving the property from foreclosure. The shift in the room was instantaneous. A heavy collective sigh of relief seemed to deflate my parents. Richard closed his eyes and his chest sinking. Caroline's rigid posture softened, a triumphant smile blooming on her face. She looked at Savannah, communicating a silent victory. The golden child had won again. Trent uncrossed his legs, resting his elbows on the table. He beamed, looking at Savannah with the satisfied expression of a gambler who just watched the roulette ball land on his color. "See, darling," Trent murmured to my sister. "I told you she would come around. Family always takes care of family." I did not finish my sentence, I said. The smiles faltered. The sudden drop in temperature was palpable. "I am not writing a blank check," I explained, shifting my gaze from Trent to my parents. "I am executing a structural buyout. The funds will be distributed only if every person at this table agrees to a set of absolute legally binding conditions. There will be no negotiations. There will be no counteroffers." I nodded to David. My attorney picked up the stack of leather-bound binders and slid one across the polished wood to each of my guests. The heavy thud of the documents settling in front of them echoed in the quiet room. "Open them," I instructed. Trent reached for his binder first, eager to dismiss whatever legal hurdle I placed in front of him. He flipped back the heavy leather cover. I watched his face. In the span of 4 seconds, the arrogant, bespoke facade he curated for 2 years disintegrated. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His jaw tightened so fiercely, a muscle twitched near his temple. The gold watch on his wrist suddenly looked heavy as his hand froze on the open page. The first page in his binder was not a non-disclosure agreement or a simple loan contract. It was a high-resolution, color-printed copy of the warranty deed for his downtown luxury condominium. Tab 2 contained the articles of organization for his holding company, highlighting his name alongside Sarah Kensington. Tab 3 held the skip trace report detailing Sarah's current residency at the condo, her utility registrations, and her vehicle logs, all cross-referenced with the exact date the $30,000 was stolen from my emergency fund. Trent was staring at a forensic autopsy of his own grift. The illusion of his generational wealth, the secret life he financed with my family's money, and the dual existence he maintained with his ex-girlfriend were all documented, verified, and bound in premium leather. He looked up from the pages. His eyes met mine across the table. The patronizing smirk was gone, replaced by the trapped, wide-eyed stare of a predator realizing he had just walked into a cage. The suffocating tension in the room coiled tight, ready to snap as Savannah slowly reached for the cover of her own binder. The quiet in the boardroom pressed against my eardrums, a dense silence that only exists in spaces where futures are dismantled. Savannah slowly turned the heavy leather cover of her binder. She stared at the first page. It was the secondary deed of trust. I did not wait for her to process the dense legal typography. I opened my own copy and began to speak. "Tab 1, I said, my voice cutting through the sterile air, clean and unyielding. A secondary mortgage levied against the family ranch initiated exactly 4 months ago. The principal loan is $150,000, secured at a subprime interest rate." Caroline's hands flew to the edge of the walnut table. Her manicured nails dug into the polished wood. She looked at David, my attorney, her eyes wide with unadulterated social panic. The presence of an outsider witnessing her financial ruin was a fate she had spent decades trying to avoid. "Larissa, you cannot discuss personal family matters in front of external counsel," Caroline hissed, her tone dropping into a frantic, breathless whisper. "This is highly inappropriate. We can resolve this privately." David did not look up from his notepad. He merely turned a page, the rustle of paper echoing loudly. "David is bound by attorney-client privilege," I replied, "and you are sitting in his boardroom because your personal family matters require immediate legal intervention. Turn to tab 2. Richard turned his page. Savannah followed her fingers, shaking so badly she struggled to grasp the heavy stock paper. "Tab 2 details the joint emergency fund." I continued maintaining a steady metronomic rhythm. 3 weeks ago, $30,000 was wired from that ledger to an external holding company. Tab 3 identifies that exact entity as a commercial real estate limited liability company. The registered managing member is sitting across from me. Savannah looked at Trent. Her eyes darted from the printed documents in her binder to the bespoke suit he wore. She still clung to the illusion, desperate for him to offer a plausible excuse. "Trent," she whispered, her voice fragile and thin, "why did you use the floral money for your holding company? You said you would pay it back. You said it was a temporary transfer for the vendor minimums." Trent swallowed hard. The prominent Adam's apple in his throat bobbed over his starched French collar. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The polished charm he utilized at country club mixers evaporated. His posture collapsed, shrinking into the heavy leather chair. "Turn to tab 4, I instructed. Savannah turned the page. She stared at the warranty deed for the downtown luxury condominium. I watched her read the cash down payment line, the $30,000 figure mirroring the theft perfectly. I watched her read the ownership titles. The $30,000 was not a temporary loan, I explained. It was the exact cash requirement for closing on a residential property, a property that excludes you from the deed, Savannah. You funded real estate you do not own. Savannah blinked rapidly, trying to force the data to match her curated reality. "But he is adding me after the wedding. We talked about this. It is a tax strategy. Right, Trent? Tell her it is a tax strategy." Trent stared at the walnut table, refusing to meet her gaze. The silence stretched heavy and undeniable. "Tab 5, I said softly. Savannah turned the final page. She looked at the skip trace report. She read the name Sarah Kensington. I watched the realization hit her, a slow, devastating wave that drained the remaining color from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. "The holding company has a co-signer," I stated. "Trent's former girlfriend. She currently resides in the condominium you purchased. She established the utility accounts 2 days after your money cleared the escrow process. You are not marrying a commercial developer, Savannah. You are funding a con artist who is building a life with another woman using our parents' equity." Savannah turned her entire body toward Trent. She waited for the denial. She waited for the smooth, confident laughter that would wave away the paperwork as a clerical error or a jealous fabrication. "Tell her she is wrong," Savannah pleaded. A single tear escaped her eyelashes, tracking a dark line through her perfect makeup. "Trent, look at me, and tell her these documents are fake." Trent finally looked up. He did not look at Savannah. He looked at me, his expression twisting into a defensive sneer. The cornered predator abandons charm for basic survival. "I did not force anyone to do anything," Trent stammered. His voice rose, breaking the quiet decorum of the boardroom, high and nasal. "She handed over the cash voluntarily. She literally wired it herself from her own laptop. I told her I had a private investment opportunity and she threw the money at me. You cannot hold me responsible for her gullibility." Savannah gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of air. The cruelty of his defense shattered the last remnants of her bridal fantasy. He was not denying the other woman. He was not denying the theft. He was simply blaming the mark for falling for the grift. Savannah covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook as a deep, guttural sob echoed in the quiet room. The wedding was ruined. The fiancé was a fraud. The money was gone. Caroline could not comfort her weeping daughter. Instead, she pivoted her survival instinct, targeting the only person she could still try to control. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Are you happy now?" Caroline shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You brought us here to humiliate us. You dragged us into a law office just to destroy your sister's life and parade our struggles in front of a stranger. You could have told us in private. You are a cold, ungrateful girl." She prepared to launch into another tirade and another masterful deployment of guilt to shift the blame away from her own disastrous choices. But she never finished her sentence. "Shut up, Caroline." The voice was low, gravelly, and commanding. It did not belong to David. It did not belong to Trent. It belonged to Richard. My father, the man who had spent his entire marriage retreating into the background, stood up. He did not look at his shoes. He looked directly at his wife. The decades of passivity vanished, replaced by the grim clarity of a man who realized his cowardice had cost him his heritage and his daughter's future. "Sit down and shut your mouth," Richard said. The command carried a weight I had never heard him utilize. Caroline froze, her finger still pointed in the air. She stared at him, stunned into silence by the sheer novelty of his defiance. Slowly, she lowered her arm and sank back into her leather chair, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. Richard turned his attention to Trent, who was currently adjusting his cuffs, preparing to flee the scene of his exposed crimes. "Get out," Richard told Trent. Trent scoffed, trying to muster a final scrap of dignity as he grabbed his leather portfolio. "Gladly. This family is a sinking ship anyway." He marched toward the glass doors. He did not look back at Savannah, who was still weeping into her hands, her breath catching in jagged hiccups. Trent pulled the door open and disappeared down the carpeted hallway. The room settled back into a heavy quiet, interrupted only by Savannah's quiet sobs. Richard looked at David, then back to me. He placed his hands on the walnut table. "You said you had a solution," my father stated, his voice steady. "You said you would clear the venue debt and pay off the mortgage." "I did," I replied. "David, please present the contract." My attorney slid a crisp, white document across the table. It came to rest directly in front of Richard. "This is a transfer of equity," I explained. "I will wire the $80,000 to the Hill Country estate to satisfy the venue contract, saving you from a breach of contract lawsuit. I will also write a check today to satisfy the secondary deed of trust. In exchange, you will sign over the controlling equity of the ranch to me. My name goes on the primary deed. You and Caroline will retain a life estate, meaning you can live in the house for the rest of your lives. But you will never be able to borrow against that dirt again. You will not be able to sell it. The heritage belongs to me." Caroline gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. "You are stealing home!" "I am saving your home," I corrected. "You mortgaged it to a predatory lender. I am securing it. If you refuse, I walk out of this room. The venue sues you tomorrow. The bank forecloses on the ranch in 6 months. You will have nothing." Richard did not argue. He did not ask for a moment to consult with his wife. He pulled a silver pen from his jacket pocket. He leaned over the walnut table, uncapped the pen, and signed his name on the bottom line. He flipped to the notary page and signed again. He pushed the document toward Caroline. She stared at the paper, her eyes wet with furious tears. She looked at Savannah, who was too broken to offer any support. Caroline picked up the pen and signed her name, her elegant cursive, shaky and rushed. The truth had done the screaming. I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to hurl insults. I simply arranged the data, presented the ledger, and let the facts dismantle the illusion. My father pushed the signed contract back across the table. I placed my hand flat on the paper. The transaction was complete. The cancellation of a high society hill country estate wedding does not happen quietly. The logistics of dismantling an event of that scale are just as complex as the initial planning. The venue released the coveted autumn date back to the public calendar within hours of the missed payment deadline. The caterers received their standard termination notices. The boutique florist, the design studio that expected to build suspended chandeliers of imported white orchids with my stolen funds, processed the cancellation of the work order. The formal invitations had already been mailed out to 300 guests, requiring a humiliating retraction. Savannah had to send a digital notice to her entire guest list, citing unforeseen personal circumstances. In Dallas, news travels faster than a wire transfer. By Monday morning, the narrative Caroline had so carefully seeded regarding my mental health evaporated into the Texas heat. The Whisper Network found a much more compelling target. Trent and his fraudulent real estate holding company became the primary topic of discussion over iced teas and charity committee meetings. People in those circles do not pity a bride who almost married a grifter. They scrutinize her judgment. Caroline attempted to maintain her scheduled social appearances, refusing to hide in the aftermath. She walked into the country club dining room on Tuesday, chin held high, wearing her usual pastel sheath dress. But the ambient chatter dipped the moment she handed her keys to the valet. The women who had sent me therapist recommendations just days earlier now offered Caroline tight, polite smiles before turning their backs. She was forced to sit at an isolated corner table, staring at a menu, while her peers dissected her family's financial exposure. The shame she tried to project onto me had boomeranged, landing squarely on her own shoulders. When she ordered a glass of wine, the server politely informed her that her member account required an alternative payment method. My corporate card was gone. She had to hand over a personal debit card, praying the transaction would clear under the watchful eyes of the women she once considered her subordinates. Savannah did not stay in the city. The illusion of her glamorous metropolitan life vanished the moment Trent walked out of the law office. She packed her designer luggage and moved back into her childhood bedroom at the ranch. For her entire life, that room had been a shrine to her achievements. Pageant trophies lined the bookshelves. Framed photographs of her wearing satin sashes decorated the walls. She was raised to believe that beauty and compliance were the only currencies a woman needed to secure a prosperous future. The reality of her return was a harsh correction. She was 28, unemployed, and tethered to a house that no longer belonged to her parents. Her golden child status was tarnished not by a single mistake, but by the undeniable proof that her judgment was fundamentally flawed. She spent her days navigating the awkward, suffocating silence of a household stripped of its pretenses. Richard spent his afternoons working in the yard, avoiding his wife and eldest daughter. Caroline retreated to her study, unable to face the social circles she once commanded. Savannah realized she had no legal recourse to reclaim her stolen funds. Trent operated his LLC like a fortress. She had gifted him the down payment under the guise of love, leaving her without a single legal leg to stand on to recover the money. I held the deed to the property where my parents now slept. I kept the physical document locked in a fireproof safe in my home office. Occasionally, I would take it out and look at the embossed seal from the county clerk. Looking at the crisp paper, I realized the profound weight of the transaction. I did not ruin my parents. I rescued them from the predatory lender they courted to save their own vanity. I saved the dirt my grandfather worked. But the cost of that salvation was the permanent destruction of their curated reality. We could no longer pretend we were a functional family. The ledger was balanced, but the emotional accounts were bankrupt. Owning the ranch meant I had erected a wall they could never scale. They could never borrow against the land again. They could never leverage our heritage to fund a caterer or a down payment for a con artist. The financial firewall was absolute, securing their shelter while stripping away their vanity. It was a cold victory devoid of celebration, rooted only in the quiet satisfaction of a solved equation. A week after the boardroom meeting, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I was pouring a cup of coffee, enjoying the quiet morning routine I had reclaimed. I picked up the device and saw Savannah's name on the screen. It was not a demand. It was a long, scrolling block of text. She typed a sprawling narrative filled with apologies and rationalizations. She wrote about how humiliated she felt packing her bags and moving back into her childhood bedroom. She detailed the suffocating silence hanging over the ranch dining table every evening. She admitted that Trent had blocked her number and retained his own legal counsel to protect the condominium she unwittingly helped purchase. She tried to appeal to a shared nostalgia, referencing summer vacations and childhood secrets, attempting to build a bridge over the chasm she created. At the bottom of the long message, she presented a request. She asked if we could meet for dinner at a neutral restaurant downtown. She wrote that she wanted to fix things between us. She promised to listen. She promised to be a better sister. I stood by the marble island reading the words twice. A few months ago, an apology like that would have triggered my deepest instinct to fix the fracture. I would have booked a reservation at an expensive Italian restaurant, paid the bill, and spent 3 hours smoothing over her bruised ego. I would have accepted the burden of repairing a relationship I did not break. That was my designated role. I was the one who absorbed the damage and paid for the repairs. But reading the text now, I felt a distinct, quiet pang of mourning. I was not mourning the relationship we lost. I was grieving the sisterhood we never actually possessed. We were two strangers, raised under the same roof, assigned opposing roles by a mother who viewed us as assets rather than daughters. Savannah wanted to sit across a table and fast forward to forgiveness. She wanted the comfort of our old dynamic without the vulnerability of true accountability. She missed the convenience of my checkbook more than she missed my company. I placed my coffee mug on the counter. I opened the keyboard. I did not type a paragraph detailing my lingering resentment. I did not outline the specific ways her actions had damaged my trust. I did not ask for a genuine apology for the money she funneled to her fraudulent fiancé. I relied on the new architecture of my life. I established a polite, impenetrable boundary. I typed 2 sentences. I need time. Let us start with a phone call in a few months. I pressed send and watched the message bubble appear on the screen. I turned off the display and walked away from the phone. The role of the family fixer was officially vacant. 6 months pass. The calendar turns from a chaotic autumn into a calm, steady spring, bringing a quiet rhythm I had never known. The absence of crisis is a tangible sensation, a physical weight lifted from my shoulders. My phone does not ring with urgent requests for wire transfers. I do not spend my lunch breaks fielding panic over country club dues, floral arrangements, or secret real estate ventures. Instead, my digital marketing firm hit a significant milestone. 2 weeks ago, I secured the regional luxury retail chain, the exact client my mother tried to sabotage during her smear campaign. I signed the contract on a Tuesday morning, poured a cup of coffee, and celebrated with my analytics team. There was no drama, just clean data and earned results. The mental energy I used to spend keeping my family afloat now fuels my own ambitions. I am no longer a designated shock absorber. I am the architect of my own future. I visit the Hill Country Ranch on a quiet Sunday in late April. The drive from Dallas takes 3 hours, tracing the familiar highways that bridge my independent life and my heritage. I hold the deed to the land resting beneath my tires, but I do not act as an overseer. I let my parents live there, bound by the legal agreements we signed in the downtown boardroom. Turning onto the long gravel driveway, I notice the property looks fundamentally different. The sprawling lawns are neat, but the performative high society shine is gone. There are no caterers setting up white tents. There are no valet stands blocking the ancient oak trees. It is simply a working farm returning slowly to its original roots. I park my car near the main barn. My father is standing by the south pasture, holding a pair of heavy leather work gloves and a wire cutter. He is repairing a sagging section of wooden fencing. For the first 2 decades of my life, Richard wore pristine polo shirts and spent his weekends retreating to his study, avoiding the physical labor of the property, just as he avoided emotional conflict. Today, he wears faded denim and a worn canvas jacket. I walk over to the fence line. He looks up, wipes his brow with the back of his wrist, and offers a small, quiet smile. We do not talk about the mortgage, the boardroom, or the grace period of the venue deposit. We do not talk about Trent. He points out a red-tailed hawk circling the distant tree line. He asks about the highway traffic coming out of the city. He tells me the soil needs a few days of steady rain before the summer heat arrives. We stand side by side, leaning against the wooden rails, watching the horses graze in the distance. It is the first genuine interaction we have shared in years that does not involve a credit card or a silent plea for funds. He looks tired, the lines around his eyes carved a little deeper, but the heavy, anxious shadow he carried for decades is gone. He is no longer terrified of a looming financial collapse. The worst scenario already happened. The facade crumbled, the truth came out, and he survived it. He traded his pride for peace, and the exchange seems to suit him. I walk toward the main house to drop off a box of coffee beans I brought from a roaster in the city. Caroline sits on the wraparound porch reading a paperback novel in a wicker chair. She wears a simple cotton sweater and slacks. The immaculate pastel sheath armor she used to wear for her high society peers is absent. She has no funds to play the society queen, and the country club revoked her access months ago. She offers a subdued greeting, her eyes lacking the frantic, calculating spark that used to assess my net worth the moment I walked into a room. She is a woman learning to live within her actual means, stripped of the audience she spent her life trying to impress. Savannah steps out the screen door carrying a glass of iced tea. My older sister wears a plain uniform polo shirt bearing the logo of a local real estate appraisal firm. She works at a desk logging property values and answering phones for an hourly wage. The glamorous metropolitan illusion Trent promised her, the luxury condominium and the private yacht charters, is a distant memory. She looks at me, offering a tentative nod. We still do not share deep sisterly bonds. The chasm between us remains too wide for a quick repair, and I have no desire to force a false reconciliation. But the toxic entitlement is gone. She is learning the true value of $1, earning her independence 40 hours at a time. I leave the coffee beans on the porch table, say my goodbyes, and walk back to my car. I do not stay for Sunday dinner. The boundaries I set remain firm, and my presence is a visit, not a return to the fold. I drive back to Dallas as the sun sets, casting long, golden shadows across the Texas highway. I reach my condo, unlock the door with the biometric pad, and step into the quiet sanctuary I fiercely protect. I pour a glass of red wine, slide open the glass door, and step out onto my balcony. The city lights stretch out before me, a grid of endless potential and moving traffic. For years, I believed my financial utility was my only redeeming quality. I believed funding their vanity was the rent I had to pay to exist in my own family. I thought walking away would destroy them. I thought refusing to pay the ransom would leave them ruined and destitute. Sitting on my balcony, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin, I realize a fundamental truth. Sometimes the most loving action you can take for a toxic family is to step back and let their house of cards fall. Shielding them from the consequences of their vanity only prolonged their sickness. By closing my ledger and locking the vault, I forced them to plant their feet on solid ground. They are no longer living a lie. They are surviving reality, and they are better for it. The peace I feel is not a triumphant gloat. It is profound, steady, and clean. It is the satisfaction of an audited spreadsheet where every column balances and every debt is settled. I take a slow sip of the wine, watching the taillights blur on the highway below. The table I set for myself is much smaller now. There are no extravagant floral centerpieces, no silver basins, and no ungrateful guests demanding more than I can give. The noise of expectations has faded into a comfortable silence. But for the first time in my entire life, the chair I sit in belongs entirely to me. This is my story. The transition from an invisible bank to an independent woman required losing a curated illusion to gain an authentic life. If you are the quiet sibling absorbing the financial and emotional debt of your relatives, know that you have the right to close the account. You do not have to buy their love. Drop your story in the comments below because someone else out there needs the courage to change their locks. Hit the subscribe button to join our community, and I will see you in the next one. We all know the house. It is the one with the perfectly manicured lawn, the seasonal wreath adorning the heavy oak door, and the gleaming luxury vehicles parked in the driveway. In American culture, we have spent generations perfecting the architecture of the ideal family. We polish the surface until it blinds the neighbors, capturing every milestone in pristine photographs to project a life of effortless prosperity and untroubled unity. We smile through holiday cards and country club dinners, terrified of the cracks forming in the drywall. But what happens when the foundation beneath that beautiful exterior is actively rotting away? The story of Larissa, her sister Savannah, and their mother Caroline is far more than a simple drama about a canceled wedding and a secret second mortgage. It is a profound modern parable, holding a mirror up to the very heart of how we raise our children. It asks a quiet, devastating question that echoes through the halls of every suburban home. Are we raising our children to be inherently good, or are we raising them to simply look good for the audience, piercing the illusion of the curated life? True wisdom in parenting begins with the rare ability to pierce the illusion of the curated life. In today's image-obsessed era, society constantly whispers that our ultimate worth is tethered to our zip code, the exclusivity of our social circles, and the staggering extravagance of our celebrations. Caroline and Savannah fell completely into this trap, believing that a luxury bachelorette trip to Bali and suspended chandeliers of imported orchids were the true non-negotiable markers of a successful life. When we as parents prioritize the family's reputation over its actual internal well-being, we inadvertently teach our children to worship a mirage. We teach them that a perfectly designed image can mask an empty, leveraged foundation. To raise children with genuine emotional awareness, we must teach them to seek the truth over the trend. We must guide them to look at the actual data of their lives, their daily actions, their fundamental honesty, their quiet inner peace, rather than the reflection they desperately seek in the eyes of their peers. True prosperity is found in authenticity, not in the exhausting, soul-draining maintenance of a false image. When we model the courage to live within our actual means, rejecting the heavy burden of debt disguised as status, we give our children the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be real, flawed, and solvent. The law of consequence and fairness. Within the framework of a traditional family structure, fairness and morality are the invisible threads that hold the tapestry together. Morality, in a spiritual sense, is not merely about following societal rules or attending Sunday services. It is about recognizing the natural laws of cause and effect, the deep karmic balance of how we treat the people sleeping under our own roof. This narrative exposes the severe emotional and energetic imbalance that occurs when parents designate one child as the golden trophy and another as a disposable utility. By grooming Savannah for the spotlight and expecting Larissa to quietly fund the stage production, their parents nurtured an entitlement that ultimately manifested its own spectacular ruin. Treating a child as a financial shock absorber while turning a blind eye to another's deceit creates a spiritual debt that always inevitably comes due. As mothers and fathers, we carry the heavy responsibility of instilling the understanding that extracting resources from others out of vanity is a hollow victory. True wealth is character. Success must be earned through integrity and hard work, not manipulated from those who are supposed to love and protect us. If we fail to teach fairness, we ruin both children. We raise one adult who cannot survive the reality of the world without a safety net they did not build, and another who walks through life believing love is merely a transactional obligation. The compassionate sword of boundaries. Perhaps the most difficult, heart-wrenching lesson in raising children is understanding the true nature of willpower. Willpower is often misunderstood as the relentless drive to accumulate more to force the world to bend to our desires, or to meticulously control our family's public narrative at all costs. In truth, the highest form of willpower is the courage to stand firmly in the truth, even when it is wildly uncomfortable and socially inconvenient. Consider the father in this story. His passivity, his quiet retreat into the shadows to avoid domestic conflict, allowed his family's foundation to be sold out from under them. Silence in the face of destructive behavior is a profound failure of familial responsibility and spiritual will. Enabling is not loving, it is cowardice disguised as peace. Conversely, Larissa demonstrates immense compassionate willpower by refusing to participate in a lie. The grace of her no is a jarring, necessary wake-up call. For parents, this teaches a difficult but vital truth. True compassion sometimes requires stepping back and allowing a carefully constructed house of cards to collapse. Protecting our children from the natural, painful consequences of their vanity and entitlement severely stunts their spiritual and emotional growth. Establishing firm, unyielding boundaries is often the most loving, desperate action we can take to guide someone back to the shores of reality. A guidepost for the future. To navigate this modern, screen-obsessed world, we are in desperate need of a fundamental realignment of our parenting values. We must begin praising our children for their resilience in the face of failure, their honesty in the dark, and their quiet effort, rather than their societal status or aesthetic perfection. We must teach them that a small, quiet table, surrounded by undeniable truth, is infinitely more sacred than a lavish, sprawling banquet surrounded by ghosts and grifters. If you found yourself nodding along to these reflections, if you have ever been the quiet pillar holding up a heavy ceiling for people who forgot to look up, you are not alone. Follow our channel QT Told Stories for more narratives that bring family secrets into the daylight and celebrate the quiet, resolute strength of walking away from entitlement. Look closely at your own dining room table tonight. Listen to the casual conversations, the lingering silences, and the heavy, unspoken expectations hovering over the dinner plates. Are the people sitting with you anchored by unconditional love and honesty, or are they held together by the fragile, suffocating strings of obligation, debt, and appearance? Sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is pull just one string to see what actually holds the structure together. You might lose the beautiful illusion you spent a lifetime building, but then again, as the dust settles on the empty chairs, you might finally meet the strangers you have been living with all these years.